Hello, everyone, and as always, welcome back to Strategy Gaming Dojo, where we find, learn, and play one more turn of the great strategy games. Today, it's back into Gary Grigsby's War in the Pacific Admirals Edition. This is our Let's Play by email with our friend Lodric, and Lodric is taking it to us. We're going to go around. It's January 16th, 1942. We're going to go around and look at the setup, kind of the big. I thought this time we'd do something a little different and kind of look at the big picture, talk about certain bigger concepts as opposed to just setting up and you watching me do task forces and stuff. We'll just kind of talk about big strategy, talk about the different nodes that I like to use in this game and what that even means. But first of all, let's go to the stats on January 16th and see where we stand. Where do we stand? Well, Lodric is building up a point lead and what will become a pretty substantial one. And the way this game works is it's based on points. Now you can win the war, total win, right? If we invade Japan and end up taking all of his bases, but usually it's going to come down to points for the most part, or somebody just gives up because they're too far behind. Sudden loss would happen if one player or the other gets four times as many points as the other one in 1943. In 1944, it's 3-1. In 1945, it's 2-1. And so, basically it starts to ratchet down. Now, are we in any danger of that? Not really. I mean, in 1943 anyway, unless things don't, unless things keep going exactly as they are now, because he has destroyed just a huge volume of ships. Now, 313 ships, 2156 points. That tells you it's about an average about 7 points a ship that we're losing. Now that's actually not bad. I mean, you want it to be under 10. We haven't lost any big capital ships. We haven't lost any carriers. We've mainly lost a lot of smaller cargo, PT boats, stuff like that. Now, I played a little loose early on and we did lose some valuable AMCs. I'm still mad about that. Our merchant cruisers, if you want to know. They're worth a lot of points. I don't think they're very valuable ships. You're best off to just hide those somewhere. But anyway, let's get into the stats and see where it stands. Um, Over the last turn, we ran 49.12 on the sorties. He ran 79.52. He's been, outdoing us about 1.5 to 1, if not a little better than that. He is running a masterful bombing campaign. If you ever want to learn how to play the Japanese and how to bomb, check out Lodric's videos because he's doing a great job of bombing us, especially in China, and just keeping the pressure on. That's causing huge army point losses because he'll just bomb, bomb, bomb until our troops are so disrupted that he gets an easy victory on the land. And so he's doing a wonderful job with that. Air to air losses, we took 9, he took 1. Now, one problem you have as the Allies early on is you have really bad pilots. Now, the Japanese are at a disadvantage because they're doing bombing. So they're doing offensive runs. They've got to escort their bombers in. Their bombers are fairly vulnerable. But the problem is you have pretty bad pilots. And so, we took 9-1. We would like this, to even up here in the next month or two. But he's, again, done a very good job with the air campaign. Destroyed on the field, 0-0. That's great. 0-4 destroyed by flak, so we got some flak up in the air. If we could keep this at 4 or 5 a turn, that would be great. Operational losses, we took 5, he took 14. Now, a lot of that is because of flak or air-to-air combat where we damaged the plane and his pilot had to bail out or otherwise couldn't get back to the airfield and they lose the airframe. Now, the problem the Japanese player has is he's got a limited supply of good pilots. They're very good at the start of the game, um, but it's very hard for him to replace them. And so, what you're really looking to do is try to whittle down his pilot pool through losses. Now, we have not gotten enough losses yet. I say yet, just in general, if you look at the aircraft point losses, it's not quite 2 to 1. It's like 1.6 or 7 to 1. We need to get more and more and more aircraft losses for the Japanese. Not so much about the airframes, but more about their pilots. Now, we have 430 political points. I have been buying out some regiments, some American regiments on the U.S. West Coast, and we will talk about that. Here's the score. I mean, we're technically still ahead, 95-80 to 86-17. But when he takes Singapore, for instance, and he's in the hex right next to it with an overwhelming force, we lose 1,800 points when he takes Singapore. So I guess the scoreboard shows we're ahead, but we're not really. He's built up a lot of points, and we got to start hitting back. Um, Base is controlled 530 to 306. That continues to tighten up. We talked about this aircraft points loss 640 we lost. He's lost 359. This is just a massive number. I've never played in a game where I've had the ground units just ripped up like has happened in this game. It's really because of his bombing. It's not so much about the land units. His bombing has been so effective and there's very little we can do about it. We don't have planes really at all in China. We really didn't have a whole lot out in the Philippines, and he's just bombed those things down into dust, and then he just walks over them, which has caused massive losses for us. But again, I mean, it's China, it's the Philippines. He's always going to take the Philippines. China, you're just trying to get to a stalemate. But that being said, that's a lot of points. Allied ship sunk 313, 2156. Let's go and look what happened this turn, and that's what we're looking for. If this is how every turn goes, we'll win this game. Uh, a 2 point British cargo ship and two 1 point Australian cargo ships. So we lost three ships this time for a grand total of 4 points. Small little cargo ships, these AKLs. That's not going to kill us, certainly. So this was a good turn for us on that front. Um, Okay, so it's fog of war, so we really have no idea. He may have lost a few more ships than this. Maybe not. I don't, we don't know. It's fog of war, but it's showing 3 and 23 for now. Aircraft losses, group reinforcement. Let's go look at the group reinforcement because we are going to be getting the Indomitable for one thing. We get a British carrier next turn, so that's great. We'll get that in at Aden. Usually you get almost everything British at Aden or Cape Town, but really Aden. And so you want to get as many of your British transports up to Aden as you can to take them, put them into Karachi, and then disperse everything from there. This is the other big one. We get 50 Warhawks at Brisbane next turn. And that's huge because he's had his carriers running up and down the coast, just terrorizing Australia. Well, there's not much we could do about it. We didn't have any fighters, nothing that could run cap. Now, the problem with these planes is they come on the map with terrible pilots. I mean, really bad. If you think about pilots, you really want them to be 60 or above. That makes them at least a pretty good pilot, not a great pilot. Of course, you want them all to be 99, right? But realistically, as long as they're over 60, they're a pretty decent pilot. And then, as time goes on, they get up into the 70s, mid 70s, and they become a really good pilot. Um, these come on the map in the mid 20s and low 30s. These pilots do for air to air combat and experience. And so you've got this dilemma that if the Japanese player is going to be running bombing missions into Sydney or Brisbane or Townsville, do you put these planes up in the air? Well, you may say, well, no, why would you? I mean, they're just going to get blown out of the sky, which is true, but you also want to dissuade the Japanese player from bombing the airfield or the ports there. And so you want to put up some kind of resistance. And so it's kind of this balancing act. Do you put up these bad pilots to get, somewhat shot out of the air? so that you can kind of defend and maybe scare the Japanese player off a little bit because his pilots and planes on his carriers are so valuable to him that even if you're taking 5-1 losses with these Warhawks, you're probably winning the war there, for that limited part of it because ultimately his planes and pilots are a hell of a lot more valuable than what you've got here with these Warhawks. So anyway, they'll be coming into Brisbane. We'll get those set up, probably run a little bit of cap, a little bit of training with them. We also have a lot of bombers coming into the eastern U.S. coast. Some stuff coming into Rawalpindi. We do get some hurricane traps into Aden. We'll need to get those down into India as soon as we can. As you can see, we get a couple of battleships, and they have recon craft out here that fly on them. Okay, so those are the planes that will be coming on the map in the not too distant future. If we look at ship availability, right now I've got based on ship type, we get the Hornet in 54 days, so we'll get a new carrier. And if we look down here at the Brits get a new carrier, the Indomitable, in 1 day. They get the Formidable in 58 days. They get the Illustrious in April. And so the Brits are going to start building up a nice little carrier fleet that hopefully we can, get down to Colombo and help defend against any type of proposed invasion that the Japanese may try to do at Colombo or Madras or Calcutta. We'll have these stationed at Colombo and ready to go. We also get a number of battleships for the British in the not too distant future. Um, okay, so that's ship availability. We talked about ships sunk. Ground, I'm not going to talk about the ground. Let's jump onto the map. And what I wanted to do this time is kind of talk about big picture. Now, if you've watched my tutorials or you watch my original Let's Play as we got started, I talk a lot about nodes. And what does that mean? Well, this game can be super overwhelming, obviously. If you're playing it, you know what I mean. You've got, right now, we've got 512 bases, but realistically, only about 25 of those really need to be micromanaged. And I call them nodes, and what that basically means is, from a logistical network standard, or logistical network standard. I that sounded like work. A logistical network point of view, you're trying to get everything consolidated into just a few points, and then you can spread things out from there. And where are my main points? Well, the eastern U.S. is obviously a launching point, right? You get a lot of troops, a lot of ships, a lot of planes at eastern U.S. What do you do with them? Well, the ships, you take the big endurance ships and you load them up here at the eastern U.S. And if we look at the eastern U.S., it's limitless essentially. You're always going to have a lot of supply and a lot of fuel here. So take the high endurance ships and you go one of two places really. You go to Cape Town or you go down to the Panama Canal at Cristobal. And so I take every cargo ship that I can get that comes in at the Panama Canal down here. There we are, and there is the aforementioned Cristobal. And as you can see, we've got a ship here. Wow, we've got a bunch of ships here. All right, so what would we do with these? Let's just look at this. Let's go cargo, and we're going to put like ships together. So these are all 14 speed, okay, and they've got a massive endurance, right? So I'm going to batch those together, and I'll put them up Eastern U.S. We'll send them up there and we'll do the home port, Eastern US. All right. Now, when they get up here, we're going to dock them. We're going to load supply with these and we're going to send them to Cape Town because did you see that endurance? We're going to send those to Cape Town. If we look at these other ones, they don't have as big of an endurance. So we're going to make a cargo task force with them. Let's take out the ones that are already in a task force. And there we go. These are all like ships, all 12, all the same. Okay, done. What are we going to do with those? We'll send those up to the East Coast. Now, those cargo ships could either go to Cape Town or they can come back down to Cristobal. And that's probably what I'll do with them. So when they get up here, I'm going to load them up with supply and or fuel, right? And I'm going to send it down back down to Cristobal. And when they get to Cristobal, we're going to have other ships that take them from Cristobal out into the Pacific. And there's two places that I take it out into the Pacific, either Haiva Oa or Tahiti. I really should say and. Haiva Oa and Tahiti. I like to have this kind of southeastern, it's really the true South Pacific, right? But it's the southeastern part of the map. I like to have these two bases be my staging. So everything from the US West Coast, from the Panama Canal, comes into these two bases, fuel and supply, and then I take smaller, less point numbered cargo ships and I go up to Pago Pago or Suva with them from here. All right. Um, Eastern US, you get, as I said, you get planes, you get ships, you get troops up here. What do you do with them? Well, if you get planes up here, you rail them out to Los Angeles. If you get troops out here, you rail them out to Los Angeles. If you get ships out here, it just kind of depends what it is, but you'll probably have them go through the Panama Canal to Los Angeles. But as you can see, I've already sent things down the rail to Los Angeles. This was a base force. It's attached to Pacific Fleet, so it's not restricted. It can go out into the Pacific immediately. Strategic move, and I like to send everything to Los Angeles. So when I talk about nodes, we've got Eastern US, we've got Cristobal, all right? So I have all of that stuff coming to Cristobal. And let's look over here on the other side of the canal at Balboa. You can see we just got all of these cargo ships in here, right? So the 15225 transport, I don't think there's really ever a reason to have more than just a couple of transports at the eastern US because you're not going to be sending that many things to Cape Town, which is why you would need the transport. Otherwise, you can just send it down the rail to Los Angeles. And so I always put a few transports up in the east or eastern US just in case you do want to run some things to Cape Town, but it's not really something you do that often. You can see we got two new subs, and so we'll just do a sub patrol with those two subs, the Gato and the Free Dock, and then we'll run those out into the Pacific and decide where we want them. But you see all of these AKs, and how do I deal with these 11,000 endurance ships? Well, they're really not made to go all the way to Cape Town. They can do it, but they have to get a little bit of fuel at Cape Town. So rather than doing that, I take these big batches of 11,000 and, I'll just put five or six, let's say, into a task force. So one, two, three, four, five, six. Okay, sure. Done. I will send these up to the East Coast, okay, the Eastern US, load them with supply, and then have them come to Cristobal, drop off. I'll then take another or six of these 11,000s, have them, I put everything over on the other side of the canal at Cristobal. I'll have an, another task force of these load here, and then that's what comes out to Haiva Oa and Tahiti, right? And why have I picked those two? Well, if we look, Haiva Oa and Nuku Haiva are very similar. I mean, they're a 1-2 with a 0-2. This is a 1-2 with a 0-2. So you can pick either one, but I do Haiva Oa. As you can see, this one's not quite as good. It's the most southeastern base on the map. Okay, so I bring everything in here and immediately start building up the port. I'm going to try to take this to a level 4 or, well, to a level 5, as big as I can get it, and use this as a warehouse, essentially. It's also well stationed for things coming from Australia. They can stop here and get fuel. It's kind of the last stop. As you can see, I mean, there's nothing out here until you get to Los Angeles, and so it's kind of the last stop shop out here. Haiva Oa, and Tahiti. And I build both of these. It's hard for the Japanese to get there. It's hard for the Japanese to put them under pressure. I mean, they can do it, but it takes a lot of fuel. And also, a lot of times, the Japanese player just doesn't want to venture out this far. You could have your carriers over here, and let me tell you, there's been more than one game where I've done that, where the carriers just kind of sit down here, let's say in this hex, as the Japanese come down and try to mess around with Tahiti, or they come over here and they're like, oh, wait a minute, he's been staging out of Haiba-Oa. Your carriers then come out, and sometimes you can get some really nice results. You can do the same thing up at Pago or Suva, but that's the secondary branch. So I bring everything into these two, and then I pop them up to um, Pago Pago and Suva. That can also cut down on the amount of times you get surprised by the Japanese coming down. Lodric knows Suva is very important to us. Pago is very important to us. He probably is less aware, that we've got stuff staging back here. We wait and see what the Japanese are up to, and then we take lower point value ships up to these places. So I always like to build these two up, bring things in here, and you'll see that as we move up the map. Let's just look at some of the things we have here. We have air cargo that's coming out here. 22nd Bomber Group. So when you see BG, that's a bomber group. When it's PG, it's a fighter group for the Americans. These are all bombers. You see the headquarters squadron. You see the other four squadrons that are part of 22nd Bomber. Where do I have them going? They're going to Auckland. Now that's just a stopover. These will eventually go to Australia, but we're going to need some fuel. So we're going to go into either Auckland or Wellington to get a little bit of fuel, and then we'll go to Australia with this group. So I've got a lot of things moving out here in the Pacific. As we move up the map here, we've got something else. This is a transport. This has got the 185th Infantry. Now, sometimes you can send this over to Cape Town because if we look at the 185th Infantry, it's where? This is a Southeast Asia unit. You can't see it on here when it's loaded on a transport. Um, no, that's not true. There it is. One US amphib. Okay, I was wrong. There's another infantry group that I've got out here that's Southeast Asia. That one could go to Cape Town and then over to, let's say, India or into Burma or something like that. One US amphib is the main headquarters for all of the Marines that are out in the Pacific, or a big batch of them anyway. And so this is moving out here. Where am I taking it? Well, let's see as we come down here, right towards Haiba-Oa. Now I have this one stopping up short, but I'll probably change that. As a matter of fact, why don't we just do that? Take that off, remain on station, have that come into Haiba-Oa. Okay, so it'll move right there. Actually, I will keep it on remain on station just in case I forget about or I don't see it one time. I don't want it to turn around and start trying to retire to Los Angeles. So you bring it into Haiba-Oa or Tahiti, and then it'll go on from there. As we come up here, I've got more transports. We've got coastal AA here, coastal anti-aircraft. We've also got an artillery group. Where do I have those going? Well, let's find out. As we come down here, it'll come right down by Haiba-Oa. And this is what I do. I just bring everything here first, and then we decide what to do with it. That one I've also got on remain on station. I think, let's see, these are transports that are heading back to LA empty. Then I've got the carriers out here. And you may say, what? What are you doing? Um, I like to take the carriers back over here to Los Angeles because you've got a number of carrier capable air units that come into Los Angeles and San Diego here early in the game, and you can kind of mix and match what's on your carriers. What do I like to do on my carriers? Well, I like to have two fighter groups, um, at least one torpedo group. Okay, so the Devastators are the torpedoes, the Dauntlesses are the dive bombers. So we've got two squadrons of dive bombers, only one fighter, and one torpedo bomber. This is kind of your standard setup, but you can add a fifth squadron, and that's what I like to do, more fighters. Maybe it's because I'm defensive in nature, I guess, or something, but I like to have more fighters on the carriers. As you can see, the carriers, this carrier, the Lexington, can carry up to 90 planes. We've only got 78 on there now. Um, and so I want to put some more on there. Also, so you have these groups that are back here in LA, and we'll go look at them as we move down here. It's these groups right here, the Wildcat, Vindicator, and Dauntless. These are all what are called carrier capable. So you can load them on a carrier. However, they're not carrier trained. And so when these carriers get back here, we may offload some of the squadrons that are already on there, put some of these on, and start training these groups for actual carrier work. Right now, you're always going to want to leave, one dive bomber, one torpedo bomber, and one fighter group that's carrier capable at either Los Angeles or San Diego. The reason is you've got to constantly be training pilots that can, are carrier capable pilots or are experienced with carrier capable aircraft. Um, to replace any that you lose. And so you always have these training groups back here. But you can, and that's what I'm doing, is bring the carriers back, load them on, and do a mix and match how which planes you want on the carriers. So I'm bringing it all back here. So that's the carriers. Just heading out here. What else do we have in this carrier group? So we've got the Lexington, Saratoga, and Yorktown. We have three cruisers. Um, the Salt Lake City, Astoria, Minneapolis, those are all for anti-aircraft purposes. If this did get attacked, you want to have plenty of big capital ships in there, and usually it's cruisers and light cruisers. I did want to point out the St. Louis, the CL. So let's look at the Salt Lake City, which is the Pensacola class. It's got an anti-aircraft of 508. It's pretty good, especially for early in the game. The Astoria 530. Okay, so these cruisers are packing a lot of anti-aircraft. Another 530. The New Orleans class is a little bit better with the anti-aircraft. But then let's look at the St. Louis. It's a light cruiser, but it's got 512 on the anti-sub. So you want to look around for these Helena class light cruisers because they're awesome to have in your carrier task force. It's a light cruiser, but it's got a cruiser's amount of anti-aircraft. We've then got our good destroyers out here, the Sims, the Hughes. They're the only American anti-sub units at this point with a 4. And so you want to put those with the carriers. Most of the American destroyers have a 2 at this point. These are the new ones that we got at the Panama Canal. They've got a 4, so put them with the carriers. Use your 2s to ferry cargo back and forth or run escort with cargo ships, um, and put the 4s in with the carriers. All right, what else do we have out here? More transport. You can see here one U.S. amphib group. This is the Marine Command, one U.S. amphib. You can see here, second U.S. Marine Corps parachute, second U.S. Marine Corps tank. Um, and so they're all moving out. Where am I taking them? I've got them going towards Nuka Hiva at this point. I think this was before I decided on Hiva Oa. They're identical bases. Sometimes I just like the name Hiva Oa, so I take everything to Hiva Oa. As a matter of fact, let's take this to Hiva Oa. If it needs a little gas, we'll put some fuel in there. But we're just going to stage there and then decide what to do next. You can see I've got subs out here, the short range subs without much endurance. I have them run patrol off the west coast of the United States. We've also got patrol craft, patrol gunboats. They're all running patrol here. Here is another transport task force. This has got 193rd Tank Battalion, which is actually an Army unit. It's attached to Pacific Fleet. Again, where do I have it going? Right down by Hiva Oa or in that area. Here it comes. there it stops. We can actually have that come into Hiva Oa. It'll just sit there. If they need a little bit of gas, they'll take it on, and then we'll go on from there. At San Diego, U.S. Navy Air West, I try to put pretty much everything that I can in there. You can see I have them running actual missions. These are really training aircraft, but that's fine. I mean, they can have some utility doing things while they're building up their skills, and so they're doing that at San Diego. As far as the units we have here, they're all pretty much West Coast restricted. You can see here we could buy out two of them. Unfortunately, the harbor defenses, I say unfortunately, I guess, I wouldn't move them anyway, but they're static, so you can't move this. That really probably the designer should have grayed this out when you can't move the unit at all. So that leaves 2nd Marine Regiment here that can be bought out. And if we look, it takes 318 points to buy it out and put it into something else. We have 430. And so this is definitely a unit that we're going to buy and put out in the Pacific. Really, all of the Marine units I move out. There's no reason to have them on the west coast of the US. Buy them out to the extent you can and move them out in the Pacific. Now, so far in the game, we've already had plenty of unrestricted units that needed to move first anyway, but now we'll buy this one out soon. We'll send it out into the blue. Okay, that's kind of it at San Diego. I've got USN Fleet Air West, the air headquarters here. There's some AA here, but again, this stuff is largely restricted except for the Marine unit.
All right, I'm back. Sorry you probably didn't notice, but I stepped away for just a minute. So just to recap where we were here, more than anything to get my mind back on it. Um, East Coast. East Coast, we're either going to Cape Town or we're going down to the Panama Canal. From the Panama Canal, we go out to you could go to Pearl Harbor with some of it, especially if you start to have some kind of supply or fuel problem at Pearl Harbor. That really shouldn't be an issue. San Francisco, LA, you should be going out to Pearl Harbor with at least one big task force of each type, supply and fuel from LA and San Francisco, and then also fuel from Vancouver. But from the Pearl, or I'm sorry, from Panama Canal, Haiva, Tahiti, I like to build these up. I'm currently building them up as much as I can. They're nice little stopover points. And then, in an ideal game, you're up here, right? You're at Pago, you're at Suva, you're at Nomaya against a really good player, which we're playing right now. You're back here. And you're at Tahiti, Haiva Oa, around to Auckland. And so you're really on the southern part of the map trying to get things to Australia, also into New Zealand. You certainly can't lose New Zealand. That's almost a game over event. And so I will be putting some of those American infantry regiments into New Zealand. I'll put some into Australia as we do everything we can to hold on to those two key locations. Then, as we go up here, as I was saying, a lot of these transports I have routing through Haiva Oa. Again, if you're playing kind of a weak player, you can go right around Christmas Island, to Pago, to Suva, straight over to Brisbane. But we're having to use the southern route, as I call it, in this one, certainly. So we've got all kinds of transports heading down through Haiva Oa or Tahiti and then on to New Zealand and Australia. We've got patrols. I take the low endurance subs. They run patrols out here just looking for Japanese subs and also any of the patrol gunboats, patrol craft out and around San Francisco and LA. These are your two major nodes on the West Coast. Seattle, I would say, is like a secondary one, but most everything I run out of LA and San Francisco. Huge task forces out to Pearl Harbor. I also have all ground troops that I want to eventually move out come to Los Angeles. I try to stack all of my transports here, so every time that you've got a ground unit that can go out that's not West Coast restricted, that is, Pacific Fleet, Southwest Pacific Fleet, Southeast Asia, et cetera, et cetera. You can put those immediately on transports and get them moving out into the Pacific. You need to get them out there as fast as you can. AA and artillery, anti-aircraft and artillery, I try to put at least one on every node island, as I would call it. So we're talking about Palmyra, Christmas, Pago Pago, Suva, Nomaya, those same names I say over and over, because they really are the main nodes out in the Pacific that you have to hold. Also try early on to get as much supply into those islands as you can, because later on, as we've seen, the Japanese can bring their carriers down and really block your ability to supply those islands. We've got 4th USAAF here at Los Angeles. Usually, what I'll do is build up Mojave, and we're currently doing that. This is Mojave. It can become a level, the biggest level of airfield you've got. So build that up, and then you can take 4th Bomber and put it there. You can get it out of San Francisco. Just realistically, the Americans probably weren't going to do a lot of bombing training missions in San Francisco. That may have scared the populace a bit. So move them out to Mojave when you get built up. I've also got all my B-17, or the vast majority of my B-17s, back here at Ogden training. And so I put 5th Bomber back here and just train up B-17 pilots. Each different group of them, I train kind of for a different thing. So I've got the guys back here on airfield attack. The other B-17s we'll put on naval or port attack, and then we'll put some on ground bombing. The ones I have over in Australia, I have on ground bombing because if you think about it, that's probably what they're going to be doing for any kind of Japanese invasion of Australia. So all the troops coming to LA, and when we look at this, you can see I've already turned some of these even restricted ones onto strat. Those are the ones that I'm planning on buying out. 160th Infantry, 164th Infantry. I think I bought out 161st Infantry Regiment already. You've got a full infantry division here. You're not really going to be buying that out most likely. Let's put that on combat. I mean, that is a lot of points. You're probably better off doing all of the regiments. These are all, like I said, restricted. You've also got the Marine Raider Battalion that's already Pacific Fleet, so that's going to go on a transport as soon as we possibly can. Probably this turn. I've got an AP here. Yeah, the Holbrook. We've got some other APs here, so we'll get that Raider Battalion onto a transport. Just make sure that you have escort with it. The last thing you want to do is lose a regiment. They're very expensive, they're very valuable, is to lose one on an unescorted transport just because you happen to run into a Japanese sub. So be careful with that. Um, I do back here at March Field also have more of the 4th USAAF. If we look at that, it's Warhawks and Lightnings, etc., etc. 4th US Fighter Command, 4th USAAF. They're all training up. I do have the one just running regular recon missions, also serving as sort of a training. Down the coast, we put recon planes going out. Same thing in San Francisco. We've got one big recon group here, I believe, or we did. Where did I do? What did I do with it? I'm not seeing it right now. We've got fighters running over the top on escort. Well, you want to get one over here to San Francisco and run a recon out into this area just to make sure if the Japanese are sending something up here, you can see it, of course. As we move up the coast, so we talked about Ogden. I've got all my B-17s that are on mainland U.S., the vast majority of them, 5th Bomber. These are all training, 7th Bombing Group. We put those on airfield. These little towns, you've got your different motorized units that I put into them. Corvallis actually doesn't need one. It's not on the coast. Tillamook's got one. I think Astoria's got an small infantry regiment. Not much in Portland. In Seattle, now keep in mind, in Seattle, when you start the game, this is where 2 U.S. fighter comes in. 2 U.S. fighter group is not restricted to the West Coast, so you can immediately get it on boats out on transports and get it out. Now that's the one that I try to base in Suva if we can. It's got a lot of fighters, and that's what you need up and over the top of Suva, so we can't bomb you into submission and take that very important island. Vancouver. It's all about the tankers. I guess we talked about that. I'm now refreshing my own memory. It's all about the tankers. You just have huge tanker groups running from Vancouver out to Pearl Harbor. With smaller cargo, here in Seattle. I have that come into Seattle, load up, and then we get up to Seward, Kodiak, Cold Bay, Dutch Harbor. You start off with a real deficit of supply and fuel in Anchorage, which is kind of odd. You would think you would have a lot of fuel up here, but you really don't. So I put together, several task forces. They can run up to Anchorage, and then you can do smaller cargo and fuel task forces out to these smaller places, or you can do them directly out of Seattle once you build Anchorage up a little bit. Prince Rupert's kind of the secondary Canadian node, I guess you would say. It does get some fuel, it gets some supply that you can get out to Pearl Harbor if you need it, but really all of Canada is about Vancouver. Everything's coming out of there. You can also see I've got a small task force that is docked here at Cole Harbor. This is just the little AKLs. It had supply, it's dropping off there, and just use those little cargo ships to go up this coast, make sure everything's in supply, it's got some fuel, but really Seattle, Vancouver up here are the main draws. As you get more Canadian planes, you can have them, train back at Winnipeg or Edmonton or potentially Calgary, and just do your training missions there. I've got infantry coming down to Juneau. The reason I'm doing that is we'll take it out here. These are kind of the important places, Anchorage, Seward a little bit. Kodiak. I always build Kodiak up instead of building Anchorage. It'd be very hard for the Japanese to come up here, do some kind of invasion of Anchorage, but they could easily come up here and try to grab Kodiak. And now he's got, your west coast, your northern part of your west coast, under a bit of threat. So I've got fighters from 11th. Now 11th USAAF is stationed up here in Alaska. It's not restricted. So you could send the 11th out into the Pacific, but you just can't lose Alaska. It gets the Japanese a really nice staging base for an attempted invasion of the United States. And so you got to try to protect this, at least in my opinion. So I put quite a bit out in Kodiak because I think it's the most obvious place for the Japanese to land if they were going to do that. Kodiak, Cold Bay, Dutch Harbor, Adak. I've got a base force out here. You don't want to give him even a foothold. Dutch Harbor is probably the most important one once you get out here. Just keep in mind you don't have an airfield at the start, so you got to start building one up. At Kodiak, we have what, a level 3 of 3, and we could build that into a 6. Back at Anchorage, like I said, you've got some supply, some fuel, but it's not overwhelming. I've got planes back there, and also some infantry. As we come out to Pearl, again, it's all coming from Vancouver, San Francisco, Los Angeles. Coming out to Pearl Harbor, and you can see here's one task force. Where is this going? This is going back to Los Angeles. This was a major tanker task force. It's got destroyers and a destroyer mine layer. I always try to have three, and I try to have one of them be a some kind of minesweeper or mine layer, and then two destroyers. That should protect you against most Japanese sub activity. Get the tankers going back to Los Angeles this time. What do we have here? We have one coming in, so we always, one in, one out. This has got a couple of massive tankers and a couple or three cargo ships. Again, you see destroyer mine layer, destroyer mine layer, destroyer mine sweeper. So I don't have any straight up destroyers here, but they all have two ASW coming in, protecting against Japanese sub activity. I've got another big tanker group. Now this is the one out of Vancouver. It's got 42,000 tons of fuel on it, and we put three KVs or the Corvettes coming in to drop off at Pearl Harbor. At Pearl itself, we've got the one carrier still here, the Enterprise. The cruisers and light cruisers are stacked on top of that. We'll get some destroyers in with it as we get some of those newer type destroyers that have 4 ASW. And when we get the Hornet on the East Coast in about 6 or 8 weeks, then we'll bring that out potentially to Pearl Harbor, or what the carriers we have back at LA will bring here, and we'll just have them all stacked. I think traditionally that's what people do, is stack all their carriers together at Pearl Harbor. I don't know that it's necessary. Let's just say the Japanese came to Pearl Harbor. Look at all the planes we've got here. I mean, we've got planes flying all kinds of cap missions over the top of Pearl. You can see escort, escort. These are all, if we add these up, we'd probably get well over 100, 150 planes running escort or cap over the top of Pearl Harbor. So you're well protected here. You're also well protected in Los Angeles. If he was, to get crazy and launch an attack on us there, we've got the entire 4th U.S. Fighter Group there, and they can run cap over the top of your carriers as well, adding to that, total defense of the carriers. But we've got a lot of Hawaiian USAAF here, running escort, doing training. We've also got the Navy Forward Air Central Pacific. That's the Navy group that's at Pearl Harbor. They're out doing recon. There are a lot of recon aircraft. You also have some bombers in there that you're doing training. And so Pearl Harbor is the main node, obviously out in the kind of central, excuse me, central Pacific. And then off of there, we take supply, we'll run some of that down to Palmyra onto Christmas. We kind of, talked a little bit about the subs. The U.S. subs at the start of the game are not very good for various reasons. They're not very experienced. The subs aren't particularly great. But the main thing is you got terrible torpedoes. So even if you get a bead on something, they usually miss, or even if they hit, they're duds. So I put them in very defensive positions. Here's 3 subs sitting right on top of Christmas. The way I do that is I just do patrol zone, set boundary 1, and I just do 1 hex. So they just do a patrol zone in this hex. So that way they're not wasting fuel. They just sit here, and if the Japanese should try to make any type of advancement on Christmas Island, we've got subs there. Same with Palmyra. I think we've got 2 subs here, and again, they're running a patrol zone of just this 1 hex. And then I take these small cargo, what do we have in here? An AKL, 1 AKL, the White Wing, down to Christmas, down to Palmyra. Make sure they've got a lot of supply and fuel. So if the Japanese come here and try to blockade them, um, you've you've got enough there you can last a while, and they can't just starve you out, essentially. We still hold Canton Island out here, which is kind of surprising. As aggressive as Lodric has been, I'm kind of surprised he hasn't tried to take Canton. But I've got, again, 2 subs running, sub patrol right here. I think I've got that. Yeah, patrol zones. That's what you want. They're just sitting here waiting for any Japanese activity. I also even got a small cargo group out here unloading to Canton, which was very low on supply. I was scared to send anything down here because he's being so aggressive that I thought, well, surely he's going to have something around Canton. I finally decided to try to get some supply in there, and we succeeded. Some of this stuff's moving back to LA. We got some transports there. We've got some more transports back to LA that have dropped things off. We have a big tanker group. Well, this has got all kinds of stuff in it. You see, it's got the escort, it's got some float. Uh, Tenders. It's got some destroyer tenders in here and tankers. I've actually got this coming straight into Tahiti, and we'll drop all of the support uh, ships off at Tahiti for later on. This will be a staging base for them, and we're also bringing a lot of fuel to Tahiti so it can act as a gas station for American forces coming by. Haiva Oa, again, Tahiti. We're starting to build this up. I need to get a base force there. I haven't quite got one out. I think one's headed that way. You can always, as you have things just floating around here, take them to Haiva or Tahiti. Here I've got the AO Sabine. That is going to come in, and actually I'll probably have that dump off at Haiva Oa and unload fuel there. So that's our kind of gas station in the South Pacific. I got a transport that got damaged out here, the Barnett. Now that's got part of the 161st Infantry on it. We're going to have something else pick that up. As you can see, it got down to a 2-speed, 64 on the float damage. We got to get that back up to Tahiti, and that's also why you'll want an AR here or a repair tender at Tahiti. So anything that gets damaged out here can go to Tahiti. It's got kind of a safe place to go get, try to get it repaired. So the 161st Infantry, the rest of it's on these transports. They're headed for Wellington. You can see 161st Infantry. We've got coastal artillery. We've got PGs. That means they're fighters, part of the 51st Fighter Group. We've got a base force. We've got more fighters. We've got more 161st Infantry. They're all headed initially for Wellington. We're going to refuel there. I'll probably put this group, though, up into Australia. And as you can see, so we come around Tahiti, we just kind of hug the southern part of the map here because we're playing against a very good and very aggressive Japanese player. What else do we have? We've got a bunch of tender boats here. So we've got a destroyer that's running escort and AM, but we've got a submarine tender, destroyer tender, we've got float plane tenders, destroyer tenders, etc., a repair ship, the Medusa. We're taking that all into Wellington. And as we get out here to New Zealand, it's all about Auckland and Wellington. Now, what I find is that most Japanese players really focus on Auckland. So I like to build Wellington up. Sometimes you'll have a carrier task force that'll come down here and just bomb Auckland and then leave. So I try to build up Wellington, and as a very secondary backup, I build up Dunedin. So if for some reason the Japanese just sit off the coast of New Zealand, you don't have everything stacked here at Wellington and Auckland. You can get out of here and go down to Dunedin. Dunedin can build up into a level 7 port and can also be the largest airfield that you can build. So it's a great place to kind of hide. I think a lot of Japanese players just forget it even exists. And so, it's kind of the southernmost point of New Zealand here. If you're really getting pressured, you can build up Dunedin, and we are currently doing that. But before it gets to that point, I like to build up Wellington. You can see I've got a lot of things in at Wellington here. We've actually just dropped off some American aircraft, including these Airacobras. We've got 8 of them that have dumped off here at Wellington. I'll probably put these in Auckland, honestly, and then the next group I'll build up Wellington. And I like to bring the Airacobras, which aren't quite as good of fighters. You really have to fly those down at 10,000 feet. I like to bring those into New Zealand. I think they're good for defending New Zealand, and I take the Warhawks all the way to Australia. As you can see, we've got other things coming in, going here, going there. This one, I can already tell you, I don't want to act like I haven't already seen this. Um, this group with 34th Infantry, we have base force in here, a construction group, a coastal artillery. I don't want to do a spoiler, but I can tell you this task force gets ripped up. My thinking was is we have a lot of recon going in and around Suva. And we've got, some coming out of Pago Pago. If we look at Pago Pago, we've got this nice search pattern. We've got search planes here. I didn't see anything here. And so you've got to get more up to Suva, whether it be supply or troops or otherwise. So I rerouted this transport that was actually heading towards, New Zealand, and I thought, okay, we're going to take a chance and try to get up here to Suva. This was dumb for a lot of reasons. So let me tell you why. Really, you never want all of this stacked together. If you're going to lose anything, only send, let's say, 2 transports. If they're safe, then wait for them to leave, then send 2 more transport. That way you never lose a big grouping all at once. And what ends up happening is this transport task force is trying to make it to Suva. It gets about right here this turn, and that's when, right as Lodric comes around the corner with his carriers, and they absolutely rips this task force apart. That's bad for all sorts of reasons. We lose the transports, lots of points. but also we lose the entire 34th Infantry. You've got to get more troops up to Suva. So that was really painful, and we'll watch that when the combat resolution happens next time. It gets here in one pulse, two pulses, three pulses. It's about right here. I think it's the secondary part of the next combat phase, and his carriers are coming around the corner. And I said, oh shit. And sure enough, it was an oh shit moment. Just absolutely tears our transports apart. So you live and you learn. You got to try to get something into Suva. It was very bad timing, but in retrospect, this should have gone to New Zealand, stage out of there, take two smaller transports, do it one at a time, one or two at a time. That way you never lose everything. I was being a little, I don't know if reckless is the word, but he's being so aggressive. I thought I have got to get troops up to Suva. Suva is worth a lot. 675 points to the Japanese. So he's coming there eventually, and we had to try to get something up there. The other thing you can do is come through Pago. Pago's a little better protected. It's a little closer to everything. For one thing, you can also take your carriers if you're playing against a player that maybe isn't as good as Lodric, and you can sit your carriers back, over here where they can't be seen. Then, if the Japanese player tries to come down here with just two carriers or maybe some battleships or something, then you can spring your carriers on him. As it was, Lodric was sitting up here doing that to us. He was baiting us into Suva, and as soon as we showed up over here, wham. Very painful experience for us coming up on the next turn. Big spoiler there for you. Down in New Zealand, like I said, it's all about Wellington and Auckland, really. Um, into their secondary Dunedin. I've got things coming from Los Angeles that, all the transports come through here because usually they need to get fuel. And then we take them out here on the southern part of the map and to the west side of Tasmania into Melbourne. There's no reason to try to be a hero and throw them into Sydney. Those can get destroyed very easily. If you bring them out over here around to the west side of Tasmania, I feel like they're a lot more safe. And so, we've just got ship after ship after ship coming to New Zealand. This game, we're going to have to really utilize New Zealand against a weaker player, as I said. You're up here against a better player, you're down here. And so we'll try to build up New Zealand because it becomes very, very important from New Zealand into Melbourne. I kind of forget about Sydney after a while against a really good player until you've pushed the Japanese back a little bit. But as of now, if you're a Japanese player, you're thinking Townsville, Brisbane, Sydney. Usually they won't come all the way around to the south and come to Melbourne. So I use Melbourne as my hub. It's further, but it's a lot safer. I've got a lot of planes training out here at Adelaide, Port Augusta. I have some at Wagga Wagga and Canberra. This is kind of where I do all of my plane training. So all of the bombers that we've gotten, you can see all of the level bombers, including the US B-17s that eventually will move up here and start bombing Rabaul. Okay, and so in the next, I don't know, next week or two, we'll move a lot of those B-17s up here to the northeastern part of the country. We'll start to bomb into Rabaul and try to bomb his port and his airfields here just in some kind of support of Port Moresby. Although in this game, very unlikely we're going to be able to hold Port Moresby. So I've got all of those training at Port Augusta, and then down at Adelaide, I've got the American dive bombers. Those will become very important, especially once he takes Port Moresby, because you want dive bombers up to the northeast so he can't bring transports across to Australia. But right now we're training them because if you look at the pilots, their experience, I mean, we're in the 30s here. You want to see 60s. Naval bombing, they're not very good. So we're just training them turn after turn after turn, trying to make these pilots better. Usually with pilots, I like to have two, three, or four more than the number of serviceable aircraft. So we've got 17 here. And also, I'd love to point out at this point that when it comes to using your pilots, if this were going to get into a scrap, and let's just say we need it right now, he's invading Sydney, right? What I do is I go to least experienced pilots and I let's say release 5 of them. So it would take out the 5 least experienced pilots. And then we go to get a new pilot. Now, we can't do it with this group for whatever reason. I mean, it's because they're so far away from the US, we can't get any pilots up here. But generally, you'll be able to get a new pilot and go to the reserve pool. All right. And then you can look and sort by their bombing ability or naval bombing ability in this case. And then you could put more experienced pilots in here. But right now we're just training them. So their experience level we're trying to build up. And so wouldn't want to do that here. So we've got 17 pilots here. We've got 17 in here. And if you look at the pilots, very inexperienced, not very good at naval bombing. We're trying to make them better. We don't these aren't critical that we have right now, and so we can use them to try to train as many naval bombing pilots as we can. And I've just got them sitting over here at Adelaide. In Melbourne, we've got a full division here. This is kind of where I stage out of in southern Australia anyway. And we've got a lot of troops here. We've got some level bombers just running a search mission. We don't have any fighters here yet because I like to take the US fighters that we get, put them in Sydney, Brisbane, Townsville. Now, you've got a choice to make when the Japanese come down here down the coast with their carriers, and that is, do you put these up in the air? And if you look at this right now, I've got them on training 100% and we've got really too many pilots here. 33 is probably too many. So let's go down here and release the 5 least experienced pilots. And when we go down here, you'll see they turn gray and the game will ship them out. So these guys are way down in the 20s. So let's just release those. So we still have 28 pilots in this group with 25 airframes. That's enough. And we've gotten rid of our 5 least experienced. They're training escort. But as the Japanese come down the coast with their carriers, you've got a decision to make. As I said, your pilots are absolute shite right now. They're not very good. Their air-to-air group, skill and their experience is very poor. And so what do you do if his carrier is sitting right off Sydney? Do you just move these away and have them continue to train, or do you put them up in a cap over Sydney? Well, it depends. In this game, I'm going to be putting them up in cap. Now, they are going to be flying out to their death. Well, I've only got them as a 0 range, so they're not flying far, but they're going to go up above Sydney and they're probably flying up to their death. Why would I do that? Why are you just going to throw away planes? Well, you get a lot of planes. That's one of the advantages of playing the Allies. And you cannot afford for the Japanese to destroy the airfield or the port at Sydney, Brisbane, Townsville, right? So more than anything, I'm going to throw him up in cap, and his carrier planes and pilots are so much more valuable than our cap that we're going to put up that even if we take 5 or 6 to 1 losses, I think, in my mind anyway, win those battles because if we're destroying really good zero aircraft and killing, good Japanese pilots with our very inexperienced and kind of throwaway aircraft, that's a good thing. And we want to dissuade him from coming in and bombing and completely taking out the airfields in these places. So I've got the fighters here. When we spot the Japanese carriers, we will put them up in cap. As you can see, we've got 25 and 33. Let's go to pilots. Let's actually get rid of our 5 least experienced, and you see they turn gray here. They will go, out and do more training because ultimately we want the best of what we've got. So now we've got 28 pilots. You can see it shows you in parens we've now transferred 5 of those away for 25 aircraft. That's probably plenty. Again, I've got them training until we spot the Japanese. I will be moving some fighters into Rockhampton. I think Rockhampton is very underrated when it comes to um, how good Rockhampton could be. You can build the port into a level 7 port. You can build the airfields up to the max. And so I actually really like Rockhampton. It's a little further south than Townsville. I know Townsville is kind of the optimal choice for a lot of people to build up in the center north of Australia, but I really like Rockhampton, and so we're going to put some fighters in there. We've got fighters in Townsville, same idea, training 100%. Now, one thing you may want to do a little closer to where you expect to see the Japanese is leave the maximum range at 0, but instead of training 100%, do escort and do your cap at 30 and your train at 40. And I think that's how we'll set these guys up this time. We've got 28 pilots for 17 planes. Let's release the 5 less experienced ones. So now we've got 23. We could even do a couple of more. Let's do one more, two more, and you see them gray out here as it comes up from the bottom, least experienced. For your training groups, your training ones, as you get guys that are more and more experienced, you can release these and release them into the reserve as they've trained up, and then you can put them in other squadrons. All right, so I think I'm going to call this an episode. Next time, we'll look at big picture all the way through Java. We may try to make it up into China. There's all kinds of interesting stuff going on in China. He's got us a little bit surrounded here, and I'm actually, I think, going to pull out of Chengchao and Luoyang. The reason I'm doing that is by him taking Nanyang, which was brilliant, by him taking that, these guys are not getting any supply now. He's also headed towards Cyan. If he has Cyan and Nanyang, we've got to get out of here. It's just indefensible. We'll never get any supply. So it's going to have to become Yan'an, Cyan, Aicheng, Changsha. That'll be kind of our line through here as we're moving back. He's being very aggressive in China, doing a good job there. So that's what's going on there in Rangoon. We're just waiting. You can see the Japanese have some aircraft here. They're going to start bombing Rangoon into our Flying Tigers. We got the Flying Tigers here. They have not been as effective this game as they have in the past. Down in Singapore, he's one hex away. He controls all of Malaysia. We've got that one little force up here that's just been bombed like crazy. He's got all of Malaysia except for Singapore. So the attack's coming. We've got most of the Dutch forces in Sumatra now sitting at Palembang, Batavia, Surabaya. Again, we're just waiting for the attacks to come. As we get up here by Colombo, we'll get more into this one next time and kind of, the big grand overview of what happens in Ceylon and India. Your nodes, of course, you've got, whoops, where's Cape Town? There it is. Cape Town to Perth, Cape Town to Colombo. You know, up here you've got Abadan, Karachi. And you may say, what in the world is going on here? Look at all of these task forces as they stream back north. Why is that happening? Well, Lodric has come around the corner here with numerous battleships, and he's probably going to go raid all these ports. So I've taken everything out of Colombo, for the most part, Madras, all up and down the coast. Bombay, that's where most of these ships are out of, and we're sending them up to at least Karachi. Some of them are going to Aden and Abadan. I also have others that came out of Bombay and they're just sitting here, remain on station. You look up here, remain on station. So we told them to come out to this hex and wait here. And they will sit here when they're on remain on station until they run out of fuel, and then they'll come back to Bombay. But hopefully Lodric will be gone by then. But anyway, we'll get into the rest of this map next time around. I've already given away the big thing that happens in the combat round this time, and that is this poor task force. I got a little impatient and I tried to send this up to Suva. It's going to get wrecked, and that one really hurts. We'd been doing so much better about not losing ships. Again, it's not a fatal type mistake, but it hurts. It's a lot of points. So anyway, I'll talk to you next time. This has been Strategy Gaming Dojo. I enjoyed this. Hope you did too. I'll talk to you next time. Have a good one.